The costumes, the hair. There's only one ABBA. And after decades of going their own way,
Benny Andersson's journey with music began long before ABBA ever stepped onto the stage. As a young boy growing up in Sweden, he was surrounded by the sounds of folk songs, church harmonies, and the gentle voice of the accordion. Unlike many children who dreamed of fame, Benny was more fascinated by the way notes could create feelings. He learned early that music wasn't just sound, it was a kind of language that spoke directly to the heart. This foundation shaped him into the quiet but powerful force behind ABBA. While the world would later celebrate the glitter, costumes, and disco beats, Benny's true compass was always deeper. He wasn't chasing trends. He was building something timeless. Those early years gave him the patience and the emotional map that guided him through decades of success and struggle. Even before touching the synthesizers that later defined ABBA's sound, he carried within him the sense of structure and balance that only years of listening to raw, honest music could provide. When ABBA eventually formed, many saw them as just another pop group. Their catchy songs and bright energy seemed simple. But behind every hit was Benny, crafting layers of sound that carried hidden weight. Working alongside Björn Ulvaeus, Benny became the silent architect of ABBA's music. Björn focused on the lyrics, while Benny poured his soul into the melodies. Together, they built songs that were easy to sing but carried deep emotions. Benny wasn't satisfied with just creating something fun. He wanted music that felt alive. In the studio, he would spend endless hours adjusting a single harmony until it felt right. He wasn't chasing perfection for its own sake, he was chasing honesty. To him, every track had to reflect a real feeling, even if listeners didn't notice at first. This obsession with emotional truth is why ABBA songs remain fresh decades later. They were built not just as entertainment, but as pieces of art, sculpted to stand the test of time. While Agnetha and Frida stood at the front of the stage, adored by fans and showered with attention, Benny often remained in the background. He was rarely the face of ABBA, but in truth, he carried much of the band's weight. He has admitted in later years that he sometimes felt invisible, not as a star, but as the craftsman holding everything together. Fans screamed for the singers, but few recognized the man arranging the strings, shaping the echoes, and giving depth to each song. Beyond the music, Benny also acted as the band's peacemaker. When creative tensions rose, he often stepped in to calm the storm. That role, though important, came with a silent cost. It wore him down over time. The world saw ABBA as a bright and joyful group. But behind the glass walls of the recording studio, Benny was often the one silently carrying the responsibility. It was a burden he rarely spoke about, but one that shaped his view of fame and success. Benny's personal life also became intertwined with the music. His relationship with Frida Lindstad was less about candlelit romance and more about shared melodies. Music was their language, the place where they understood each other best. But while Frida expressed her emotions openly, Benny often retreated into silence. He used the piano to speak when words felt too heavy. Songs like The Winner Takes It All and One of Us carried messages that Benny struggled to say directly. For him, writing pain into music was easier than facing it in real life. Frida, on the other hand, lived those lyrics fully. She carried them into her performances with raw emotion, making the songs personal. This difference, while powerful in the studio, created distance in their home life. Benny has since admitted that he gave his best lines to songs, not to the people who needed to hear them. It wasn't cruelty, it was fear. Music was his shield, but it also became the wall that separated him from real connection. For decades, people speculated about rivalries between ABBA's female singers, but Benny now reveals the real rivalry was something else entirely. It wasn't about Agnetha versus Frida. It was Benny against perception. In the public eye, ABBA was mostly defined by the glamour of its women. While Benny and Björn were often labeled as the men behind the music, Benny quietly struggled with this. He didn't crave the spotlight in the same way, but he longed to be seen for what he truly gave. Critics often dismissed ABBA's work as simple pop fluff, not realizing how much depth he built into every harmony. He wasn't just programming melodies, he was pouring heartbreak, longing, and discipline into those songs. For years, this mislabeling left him feeling invisible in his own creation. He admits he often read reviews hoping someone would notice the complexity in the arrangements, but more often than not, the world only saw the shiny surface. That silence became his greatest rival. ABBA's end was not marked by dramatic fights or explosive scandals. It was quieter, almost like a candle, slowly burning out. The pressures of constant touring, the exhaustion of fame, and the slow fading of creative joy all chipped away at the group's foundation. Benny recalls that by the final years, he wasn't staying because of passion. He was staying out of guilt, out of a sense of duty not to let anyone down. The music no longer carried the same spark. What once felt alive now felt forced. Without big farewells or tearful goodbyes, the band simply drifted apart. For Benny, the silence that followed was haunting. It took him years to fully understand that ABBA was truly over while fans looked for a scandal or a headline to explain the breakup. The reality was simpler but sadder. The music no longer felt true. The group had given everything they had, and there was nothing left to give. After the split, Benny didn't chase more fame. Instead, he turned inward, finding comfort in theater, film scores, and orchestral projects. This new chapter allowed him to explore music without the baggage of fame or personal turmoil. Works like Chess gave him space to express feelings he had buried during ABBA's busiest years. He also began keeping journals, writing unsent letters to his old bandmates, finally saying the things he never could before. Over time, Benny found a new role as a mentor, guiding younger musicians not just in technical skills, but in emotional honesty. He understood better than anyone that music without truth is empty. Teaching others became his way of passing on lessons he had learned too late. This quieter, more reflective life helped him rebuild his identity outside of ABBA's shadow, showing that even after unimaginable success, reinvention is possible. Now, at 78, Benny has reached a place where he can look back with honesty. In a rare moment of reflection, he admitted what fans had long suspected. ABBA wasn't built on fairy tale joy. It was built on pain, on escape, on fragile humanity. ABBA worked because we were broken. The music made us feel whole, he confessed. This simple truth reshapes the way we see their story. The glittering pop group wasn't a symbol of perfection, but of survival. The joy in their songs was real, but it was also a mask hiding their struggles. Behind every harmony was a cry for balance, for healing. Today, Benny no longer seeks applause or validation. Instead, he seeks understanding. His story shows that ABBA's legacy isn't just about catchy songs or dazzling costumes. It's about how for fragile people used music as a lifeline, holding themselves together through sound, even as their personal worlds fell apart. Benny Andersson's love for music began in his early childhood in Sweden. Surrounded by the sounds of folk songs and the gentle rhythm of the accordion. While most children dreamed of excitement and adventure, Benny found his magic in melodies. To him, music wasn't just noise, it was a way of expressing emotions too big for words. This early connection gave him an emotional compass that later defined his work. Unlike many artists who chased fame or fortune, Benny's journey was always about truth in sound. He learned patience, discipline, and the value of listening before creating. These qualities made him not just a performer, but a craftsman of music. Long before ABBA was even an idea, Benny was developing the quiet determination and honesty that would shape the group's identity. His childhood may not have been glamorous, but it gave him the tools to turn simple notes into timeless emotions. When ABBA finally formed, the spotlight naturally fell on Agnetha and Frida, the glamorous front singers. But behind the voices was Benny, shaping the melodies and harmonies that made the group unforgettable. Working closely with Björn Ulvaeus, Benny became the architect of ABBA's music. Björn often focused on lyrics, while Benny carefully layered the melodies that carried those words straight into people's hearts. To most listeners, The songs sounded simple, bright, catchy, and fun. But hidden beneath the surface were complex arrangements and emotional depth. Benny's secret was that he never wrote for trends. He wrote for truth. He wanted every chord to mean something, every harmony to echo a feeling. That's why, decades later, ABBA's music still feels alive. It wasn't built just for charts or radio, it was built with care, honesty, and a deep respect for human emotion. While ABBA appeared to the world as a picture of joy and unity, behind the curtain, things were much harder. Benny, in particular, often struggled with being unseen. While fans cheered for Agnetha and Frida, few noticed the man who spent sleepless nights arranging harmonies and balancing the group's sound. On top of that, his relationship with Frida Lindstad added another layer of complexity. Their bond was real, but fragile. For Benny, music became a shield. Instead of expressing feelings directly, he poured his heart into songs like The Winner, Takes It All, and One of Us. These were not just catchy tunes, they were confessions in disguise. But this way of living took a toll. By putting his emotions into music instead of conversations, Benny built walls even with the people closest to him. This unspoken struggle was part of ABBA's brilliance, but also part of its eventual breakdown. Unlike many famous bands, ABBA's end wasn't dramatic. There were no explosive fights or headline-grabbing scandals. Instead, it was a slow and quiet collapse. Years of constant touring, the exhaustion of fame, and fading creative joy all wore them down. By the final years, Benny has admitted that spark was gone. He stayed in the group, not out of passion, but out of loyalty, afraid to let others down. The music no longer felt alive. What began as a dream slowly turned into a duty. And when ABBA finally drifted apart, there wasn't a loud goodbye, just silence. For Benny, this silence was the hardest part. It took him years to accept that ABBA was truly over. Fans may have searched for scandals or betrayals to explain the split, but the truth was simpler. The group had given all they could. The well of inspiration had simply run dry. After ABBA, Benny could have chased more fame, but he chose a different path. He turned to theater, film scores, and orchestral projects, where he could explore music without pressure. Productions like Chess allowed him to write more deeply, to express emotions he had once kept locked away. He also began writing letters and journals, privately saying the things he never spoke aloud during ABBA's busiest years. Over time, he found peace in mentoring young musicians, teaching them not just about technique, but about emotional honesty. He knew better than anyone that music without feeling is empty. This quieter, more reflective stage of his life became his healing process. It showed him that even after global fame, a person can reinvent themselves not for applause, but for inner peace. Now, at 78, Benny finally feels free to tell the truth. In a rare confession, he admitted that ABBA wasn't built on perfect joy or harmony. It was built on pain, brokenness, and the need for escape. ABBA worked because we were broken. The music made us feel whole, he revealed. This statement changes how we see their legacy. The glittering costumes, the cheerful choruses, the dazzling smiles, all of it was real. But it was also a mask. Underneath was struggle, heartache, and vulnerability. And maybe that's why ABBA's music still touches people today. It wasn't just pop, it was survival. For Benny, this honesty is the legacy he